The Arctic Explorer and the abandoned toy workshop. How long have they been here? Maggie materialized through the blizzard like a wraith, her form and footsteps muffled by the swirling snow and ice. I wasn't startled. Noticing her gaze on the cigarette in my hand, I simply nodded and offered her one. To my surprise, she took it. We stood in silence, our eyes fixed on a spot on the horizon where we knew the perfectly preserved ship lay. I asked headquarters to send a drone with more suitable supplies, I said. Looks like we're staying. Maggie let out a low, mirthless laugh. Sebastian must be ecstatic. He seemed pretty antsy, I replied. But personally, I'm happy not to look at another piece of rendered animal fat. Horrendous torture. Tell me about it, she groaned, shaking her head. I've run 10 miles every morning since I was 17, but the last few days have been a different kind of hell. And he's just thriving on it, isn't he? It's his MO, I responded. His thing. He only agreed because he thought we'd never find the damn ship, and the trip would be 2 weeks of continuous trekking through the Arctic winter. But he has his own funding to look after and needs to generate buzz with little trips like this. 5,000 calories a day, Maggie said. I can't imagine why anyone would do that for fun. At least the new supplies are more fitting for camp life. I pointed to my cigarette, burning down to its filter. Plus, we can sneak in a few luxuries, not having to haul every pound behind us anymore. Maggie took a final drag and handed me the butt. I had an empty Coke can for Ash. I didn't like to just toss it on the ground. The ice is safe, she informed me, dropping a bombshell as if it were nothing. It's actually miles thick. We just got the full satellite data, and it's pretty interesting. Why? I asked. It's not alone. There's something else about a day's walk north of here. Solid, hollow, and large. I wanted to double-check before I reported it. It's certainly a very strange find. Well, we have a ship to explore for now, I said. If Sebastian wants, he can burn off some calories checking out the second signal. I watched Maggie disappear back into the gray wind before returning to my tent. Settling onto my cot, I contemplated the news she'd delivered. My eyes drifted to the horizon again and again as I turned her words over in my mind. The ship was safe to board. The ship? I'd spent years writing about it, publishing papers, investigating. Hell, there was even a miniature model of the damn thing in my living room that I'd made myself as a young grad student. The Pina, lost with its entire crew in a less discussed attempt to find the Northwest Passage. 80 feet long, it was a caravel, and thus one of the first European ships capable of crossing the Atlantic. I'd spent years hypothesizing that it was still frozen in the ice, much like the infamous ghost ship HMS Terror. A comparison I happily exaggerated after the success of the fictional novel and television series based on the Lost Franklin expedition. Then came a wealthy benefactor, and I was equipped with more money than my department had seen in years, along with the experienced but cantankerous Sebastian as my guide. And somehow, against all odds, we found it after 7 brutal days of walking. From the first glimpse of its mast miles away, I zoomed in with uncontrollable excitement. Knowing it lay there waiting, I had no hope of sleep. I rose from my cot and grabbed my flashlight, but didn't turn it on, allowing my eyes to adjust to the darkness as I checked the camp for any signs of activity, ensuring I was truly alone. I began to walk. It wasn't a long distance. We'd camped a few hundred meters away to avoid any risk of the ship cracking the ice, however unlikely. Still, it was dark, and I was quite disoriented after a few minutes. Even with my flashlight, I began to feel the first pangs of panic. But I pressed on until, after 20 anxious, stumbling minutes, I finally saw the mast again. It was just a glimpse in the darkness. A patch of white above that caught my flashlight beam and startled me. Lowering the light revealed the rest of the ship, and for a fleeting moment, I was stunned by its majesty. The ship was so close I could almost touch it, and though I'd seen larger vessels before and since, there was something about this one that made me feel breathtakingly small. It was as if the groaning ice beneath my feet was whispering, "I belong to the ship, not the weather," as if it were a colossal sea beast calling out to me. This ship had left shore on May 5th, 1543, and never returned. Yet the name, Pina, was still written along its hull, carved with beautiful detail on a stone plinth as long as I was tall. And just a few steps away was a ladder, offering access to the vessel. I tested the wooden plank and nearly cried when it held my weight. I climbed 2 rungs before slipping, splitting my lip on the hull. I didn't let that deter me. Even as the weather threatened to freeze me in place, I clumsily forced myself over the rail and collapsed onto the deck, screaming my laughter into the blizzard. No one would hear me anyway. The ship was like black volcanic rock encased in glittering ice. Here and there, fragments of rigging and wood protruded, so cold I imagined they would tear my hand if I touched them. I marveled at the sight, taking a slow, cautious circuit of the deck. I let out a great whoop of delight when I saw the rudder was intact, and even the wheel. I thought I would stop there, but as the minutes ticked by, it still wasn't enough. And when my foot caught on the hatch leading below deck, I found my hand moving towards the latch before any conscious thought. It wasn't easy to open. It took an hour or 2. But considering everything, it wasn't as difficult as it should have been. And when the door finally sprang open, falling into the hold with a thunderous boom, it revealed a flight of steps descending into absolute darkness. As I saw it, I felt a small catch form in the back of my throat. The ship's rigging was broken, its crossbeams and masts snapped and split, the wood splintered. I was stepping into a tomb. The Arctic is a strange place, its geography profoundly different from what we are used to. Vast, shimmering white monoliths soar meters into the air, walls of snow poised to collapse, and a landscape painted in pure white that appears to human eyes as a vague, almost surreal abstraction. The ground isn't solid rock but floating ice, and beneath it lies one of the world's most hostile and unknown oceans, an ocean forever cut off from sunlight. I glanced around the starlit hold one last time and descended into the ship. The roaring wind faded to a hiss as I ducked below. The stairs led to a small cellar with a single corridor running towards the bow, where I knew I'd find the captain's quarters. My intention was to go straight there and ignore the little things along the way, except what was waiting for me in the hold was no little thing. I shrieked when I first saw the head. It was an emaciated, eyeless thing, its leathery skin crinkled into a frozen smile of agony. A gnarled hand reached out towards me, and I screamed again, falling backward, sending my flashlight spinning. It finally came to rest on the monstrosity before me. The deathly shriek caught in my throat as I realized the thing wasn't moving, and it wasn't a single thing. Dozens of heads lay piled on top of each other, arms and fingerless hands pushing out at grotesque angles, as if they were desperately reaching for something just out of their grasp. It was a pile of corpses, their limbs and torsos intertwined in a display of torture and dismemberment and broken bones. I let the deadly horror drain from me, but all desire to stay another second was gone. I snatched up the flashlight with trembling hands and turned back the way I came. That's when the hatch slammed shut, and I felt another scream of terror rise in my throat. "Why didn't you call me?" Craig said as I sat shivering under a space blanket. I clutched a small cup of hot chocolate, which I'd spiked with a shot of brandy when no one was looking. I thanked him with a grateful nod. "You know I would have done anything to be there with you," he added. "Then you're as stupid as he is," Maggie said, stepping onto the ice as Sebastian began to follow her. If I hadn't wanted another cigarette, I never would have noticed him missing. He would have been stuck in there all night with that. Craig looked at Maggie and she nodded. "Damn it," he said, "I have to go see." "Let him go," I said just as Maggie was about to stop him. She rolled her eyes but let him go, and Craig caught up with Sebastian just as he took his final step off the ship. "This could have been much worse," she said, not expecting an answer. I imagined that would be the end of the matter, and I looked up expectantly as Sebastian approached to join the conversation. I owe you an apology, David," he said, looking a little pale around the edges. "When I heard you scream, I thought the hatch closed and you just got spooked. But God, that thing. No one wants to be locked in the dark with that thing. What the hell was it?" "The crew," I suggested. "It's a shame we didn't bring a biologist." "Your toys could help with that, couldn't they?" Sebastian said. "You've got drones coming and going so often we could open a department store. We can take samples and come back. We could even install a video feed." Maggie, a meteorologist, dabbed her forehead. "I certainly feel a little out of my depth," she said to me at the end, and I struggled to think if anything I'd ever encountered came close to what I'd seen in the ship's hold. When nothing came to mind, I shook my head. A fucking Christmas tree, Sebastian said with a dark laugh, and I felt a shiver run down my spine at his words. It had indeed housed some kind of tree, and I made a mental note, hoping it wouldn't jump back the next time. "I've got my own tree in my living room here," he exclaimed. "Maybe you can hook the drones up to it and fly the whole thing back to town." Sebastian really didn't like drones. If he had his way, he'd have us doing expeditions with dogs and seal fur mucklucks, just like his ancestors. "That reminds me," I said. "Maggie has something to show you. I think you might like it." We'd been told the worst thing was to touch or move it, so we didn't. The frozen mass of flesh and desiccated bones was obscured by makeshift curtains Craig had hastily rigged, and we continued working as if it wasn't there. Craig and Maggie took photographs and cataloged every object we found, carefully labeling and classifying each clamp and blade for later expeditions. I tried to sift through these items for something that might offer a clue to the ship's ultimate fate. About a dozen men crewed the ship in its heyday, including a surgeon, a cook, a blacksmith, and a cartographer. We found faded, tattered letters speaking of mothers and wives, small figures carved from whalebone, and ancient homemade wine bottles hidden under pillows. The ship's surgeon and resident scholar even had a rather fine collection of seashells he'd carefully labeled. Here and there, we also found suspicious dark patches on the floor, or a knife embedded in a door or wall, but we tried to ignore the implications of violence. The captain's cabin, however, was peculiar. I concluded that the ship had disappeared near Christmas based on a holly branch tacked to the ceiling, a small concession the captain had made for the holiday season. But the desk was broken in half. Ropes and twine lay scattered across the floor, and clear drag marks ran along the wood, along with a few detached fingernails. There was also a flintlock pistol, discharged under the desk, with a single, half-gnawed human finger lying nearby. In the surgeon's cabin, I found empty cupboards, the common oils and medicines of the time as useless as they would be strange. Although his journal said nothing of disease spreading among the crew, there was a lifetime of work and details we recorded that would guarantee more funding than I could have ever imagined. We had our ghost ship. We had our thrilling and gruesome details. And we had a massive, inexplicable pile of corpses that would confound some of the greatest researchers in academia. It was a little terrifying, but otherwise it was good news. Sebastian had left the day before and remained in regular contact for the first 12 hours. Then he went silent, which we attributed to bad weather or his general single-minded focus. At the 24-hour mark, Maggie became a little antsy, and when she pointed out his silence to Craig and me, we found ourselves sharing her concern. We decided to try hailing him on the radio, waiting in silence for his reply. What came was a series of discordant clicks and heavy breathing. "Sebastian," Maggie asked, "are you all right?" But there was only the strange static of the radio, broken by breathing or an occasional grunt. "Sebastian," she yelled, "please answer." We tried for hours until his radio eventually stopped returning any signal. Craig thought his battery might have died, or perhaps Sebastian had simply switched it off and started ignoring us. But there was something about those strange sounds that left us all feeling a little uneasy. Maggie suggested that he had simply accidentally activated the radio, and we were listening to the sounds of his walking, but the breathing sounded close and guttural, almost animalistic, like a man near death. Still, it was the best theory we had, and we agreed to wait a little longer. The next 12 hours were tense. We eventually stopped working and returned to camp, where we tried to contact him with our more powerful radio and updated headquarters. The coastal ship had sent a few drones over Sebastian's presumed location and reported no sign of the man. Not surprising, we thought, given how hard it was to find anything in the frozen tundra. But the pit in my stomach grew heavier with each passing hour we didn't hear from our guide. After 48 hours, the decision was made. We would have to go looking for Sebastian ourselves. We had moderate experience in hiking, and the spot shouldn't have been more than a 6-hour trek. Sebastian himself had insisted on making the journey on foot, always eager to push himself to the limit, and perhaps that had led him to some accident. "Is that a door?" Craig asked. "I think so," I replied. Maggie knelt, staring at the door, which was no taller than my waist and half submerged in a snowdrift. I reached out and brushed away the ice and snow around the frame, revealing a wall made of crudely stacked wooden planks as thick as my torso. Who the hell puts a door here? He asked. It goes deeper, Maggie replied, cupping her hands around her face as she peered through a small window set into the door. I think I can see stairs going down. Are we sure Sebastian was here? I asked. Almost certainly, Maggie answered, holding up a small piece of blue fabric that had snagged on the doorframe. It was the unmistakable baby blue of Sebastian's windbreaker. He wasn't the only one, Craig said, plunging his hand into the snow to pull out a wooden knife bearing the crest of the pina. Looks like our ancient explorers came this way too, and I don't think it ended well. I took the knife and noticed a faint, reddish-brown, rusty fringe along the blade. We'll have to mark this path for future reference, I said, and GPS tag this whole area for a full excavation at a later date. Maggie nodded and took the knife, adding it to her kit. To open the door, it took a bit of effort, but it quickly sprang open, swinging inward with an unholy shriek that made us all flinch. The building had such a low roof we had to duck. The crossbeams above us were crudely hewn tree trunks with their bark still visible, preserved by God knows how long spent in the Arctic tundra. It was like a makeshift cabin, the kind you'd find in the Canadian or Northern European wilderness. It had the solid, utilitarian look of Viking architecture, and Maggie pointed out a few strange runic letters sewn into the inner doorframe that I couldn't properly translate or identify. But they seemed vaguely familiar. The room was about 20 by 20 feet, with a countertop running along 3 walls. Maggie shuffled over and picked up one of the stools neatly tucked under the counter, holding it up. She showed it was no bigger than my forearm. What the hell, she muttered. Is this a fucking joke? Craig exclaimed, drawing our attention to a small wooden object he held in his hand. It was a hedgehog, or a carving of one, with small wheels instead of feet so it could roll along the ground. Perhaps some kind of religious fetish, I mumbled, swallowing a lump of anxiety in my throat. It's a fucking toy, Craig yelled, laughing at the absurdity. Is this some weird university PR stunt, Dave? Because if it is, I'm not happy. I don't know what this is, I said, but I'm not involved, and if any of you are, I'd appreciate it if you spoke up now. Sebastian might be, Maggie said, a tremor in her voice. She was holding up one of his shoes, the fabric half torn and soaked in fresh blood. Maybe this is all his doing, I said. He was sent here by the university with us. I hammered my fist against the wall and realized I could smash my hand against that log and not leave a dent. It seems too elaborate for a joke, I said. We should work on the assumption that Sebastian needs our help, and if this is a joke, we can kick his ass later. Right, Maggie agreed. And together, we headed towards the nearby stairs. Footprints were clearly visible in the thin layer of snow that had drifted into the building over the years, and we knew that if Sebastian was close, he had to be somewhere below. I've never seen this before, Craig said. This kind of material. He was holding a toy horse, crudely assembled from basic cylinders and squares. The material covering it was a strange, soft velvet hide, defying the icy temperatures. He turned it over in his hand, and we both noticed a faded blue patch. I watched him squint for a few moments, then reached out, signaling him to put it down. What is it? He asked, ignoring my suggestion. It's Erasmus, I said, my voice a little hoarse. The patron saint of sailors, you should put that down. Why would someone paint that on a toy? They didn't paint it, I replied, but they almost certainly tattooed it onto the arm of a 16th century sailor. His eyes widened, and he dropped the toy with a disgusted cry. Damn it, he yelled. Not only that, Maggie added, I think this is bone. She held up a small carving of baby Jesus, no bigger than my thumb, made of yellowish ivory. Guess where that came from? Many Arctic cultures make carvings from walrus bone, I suggested. How many of them make fucking toys in a workshop built for hobbits? Craig yelled. Am I the only one who wants to connect the dots here? Do you have any ideas? Maggie asked, looking my way. I shook my head. Perhaps an old European colony, I said. Someone came here to try and, I don't know, maybe religious fanatics, someone trying to recreate a myth. From what? Craig asked, and where the hell is Sebastian? The floor we were on was much busier than the last, cluttered with workbenches and tools for woodworking and carving. Many of them lay scattered across the floor. Somewhere beneath us, the walls must have collapsed, and that's where the ice came from, as the snow covering the floor was significantly thicker here than above. We found no clear sign of Sebastian, except for some disturbances in the snow that led, once again, to another flight of stairs going down into the darkness. "That's not good," Craig mumbled. Sebastian's ice axe was plunged into the floor up to its hilt. A few strands of hair were still wrapped around the blade, along with coils of rope identical to the kind found in the pina. "That too," Maggie said, pointing to a Christmas tree. Not only were the toys in this part of the building becoming more insane, depicting men with giant phalluses and women tearing open their chests to reveal ribs and lungs and hearts, but an ancient, withered tree stood dominating the center of the room. Its branches were adorned with desiccated enamel fruit and peat ropes that would be familiar to anyone who had seen what centuries of decay could do to frozen human remains. The decorative orbs were internal organs. The tinsel was exposed intestines, freeze-dried over centuries of exposure. One of the orbs, however, was fresh, turning the snow beneath it a velvet red. "What is that?" Craig asked. "I think it's a kidney," I said. Steam was rising from the piece of dripping red offal that streamed from the branches. "It's still warm, too." "The eyes on that doll," Craig said, swallowing nervously in the cold. "Are they familiar to you?" I turned to the toy he was staring at, its haunted face illuminated by the powerful beam of his flashlight. Its expression was remarkably carved, looking almost lifelike, if not for the clear color of the hardwood. The eyes, however, were too human, and the crystal blue pupils were indeed quite familiar. Unable to resist the curiosity, Craig reached out and gently poked the glassy eyes. Only they weren't glass. They were soft, and Craig's finger recoiled with a thin trail of viscous fluid left on his skin. "They're still warm too," he said, nauseated. "Oh God, they're his, they have to be." We had finally found Sebastian. He was alive in a sense, though barely clinging to life. He had been eviscerated like a turkey and left to freeze in the biting cold. His skin and bones were pulled apart with professional precision. His face was a pale mask of horror. He was conscious, but could only whimper and cry, blind and terrified. He initially recoiled when Maggie reached out to him. He was naked and would die in a few more seconds. And Craig almost instinctively covered him with his jacket, but stopped when he realized it would lie directly on top of his exposed chest cavity. He lived no more than a minute as we knelt there. He didn't speak, no matter how desperately and fearfully we asked our questions. The only sense we got of what he was enduring was the fleeting relief on his face when he finally died, as if he had at last woken from a terrible nightmare and escaped the horror. "I thought old Nick was a saint," Craig said, wiping snot and tears from his face after we'd all had a good cry. "If this is his workshop, it's a messed up place." "Could be a madman settled here," Maggie said. "A serial killer with a warped Christmas obsession." "Doesn't explain the sailors," I countered. "The knife by the door, the tree, the toys clearly made from their remains. How could that be a serial killer? So what are we saying then?" Craig asked. "Santa's elves went rogue? Is that it? What the hell does any of this mean? Does it matter?" Maggie replied. "We need to get Sebastian back to base camp, and then we need to get out of here as soon as possible." "Sebastian may not be an option," I said, looking at his still steaming remains. "I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to be in this place another second. And as grim as it sounds, we have to weigh our responsibilities to the dead against our responsibilities to the living." "You mean us," Maggie said. "Yes," I nodded. "I mean us. We're not going to help him by dragging him up 4 floors and across 15 miles of open Arctic tundra. But we can at least make our lives a little easier by moving on and calling for help as soon as possible." "What will we tell them?" Craig asked. "We'll figure it out," I replied. We returned to camp a few hours later, carrying a few less horrifying artifacts to examine. The journey back was a strange and silent one, and Craig more than once mentioned how grateful he was that it was still light out. We barely managed to make it back just as the sun was setting. Looking at the approaching night casting a dull gloom over the magnificent tundra, I found myself agreeing with him. We all wanted to be somewhere safe, somewhere protected. And the flimsy tents of our camp didn't offer enough protection against nature, let alone whatever else might lie outside. But they were the best we had. As if to emphasize this, when I arrived, I noticed them flapping in the wind, and fearful of the night, I would stay there. How long until the second team arrives? Maggie asked. A few days, Craig replied. We could go on the snowmobiles ourselves, but I don't want to risk it without Sebastian. Not to mention, he let the words hang in the air. I knew what he meant. Not to mention whatever else might be out there. It's going to be a long wait, Maggie said. Yes, I replied. We all spent the night in the same tent, listening to the storm brew until it felt like we were a lone island in endless darkness. At one point, we were woken by something outside, and we carefully waited until it stopped. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but it must have been late. I couldn't have slept more than a few hours before Maggie shook me awake with the dazzling light of morning. David, she cried. Craig's gone, he's missing, I can't find him anywhere. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and crawled out of the tent. In a quick motion, I took in the destroyed gear and the torn tents. Something had been sniffing around our camp, and it hadn't stopped searching until it found what it wanted. Do you think it's a bear? Maggie cried, the melting ice running down her face. They're coming further and further inland every year, and there have been more than a few. She trailed off as she saw me stoop and pick something up. I held it up for both of us to see, a length of rope made of coarse fiber, unlike anything we carried. It was an exact replica of the kind I found scattered around the pina and the workshop floor, except this one was stained with a patch of fresh red blood. Damn it, she whispered. Where do you think he went? The storm had broken, and the morning air was so clear we could see the pinas massed all the way from camp. You don't think? I think so, I said. Look, the snow's disturbed along the path. Maybe if he got lost or confused and strayed from the path, he might have relied on the markers we left to find his way to the ship. You know what Craig would say right now, don't you? Maggie asked. He'd say it's bullshit. I hope he's wrong, I replied. We were halfway there when we found the box. It had been wrapped and left alone in the middle of our path, its top clear of snow. Small, child-sized footprints led away from it, back towards the pina. That's really strange, Maggie said. I knelt and noticed a name tag carefully inscribed in careful handwriting. Wilcom Winus Nogi. Welcome, old friends, I said, trying my best to translate. It's Old English. I pulled at the simple string binding the brown paper around the box, and the entire package opened with elaborate ease. Each side of the box dropped away, one by one, and Maggie let out a horrific scream. Oh God, she shrieked. What the hell is that? It was Sebastian's head, his mouth stuffed with blood-soaked straw, while his empty eye sockets stared at us with terrible agony. Craig! Maggie cupped her hands around her mouth as she screamed into the open door of the pina's hold. There were no other gifts waiting for us on the ship, and no sign of our friend on deck. At one point, I almost told Maggie that he was probably in the hold, where it would be safe and warm. But the words died in my throat. I couldn't keep clinging to such a hopeless idea. Come on, I said weakly, let's go down. The hold hadn't changed since our last visit. The pile of corpses, intertwined in a desperate tangle of violence, still stood taller than anything else in the room. There was something about those eyeless faces that was burned into my mind, and once again, I wondered exactly what terrible fate they had suffered. Maggie and I were silent in our search for Craig. I couldn't bring myself to call out to him, and neither could Maggie. It seemed futile, and a small part of me kept telling me to stay small and quiet, hidden from view. Don't draw attention to yourself, it said. Don't cry out. We checked every room of the ship, every compartment, every hold, every cupboard and pantry. Until finally, we both converged at the captain's quarters, and our breath caught in our chests as we noticed the door standing wide open. Craig's clothes lay in a heap a few meters past the threshold. Craig, Maggie yelled, rushing forward. I almost joined her, but at the last second, some flashing movement stopped me. Before I could warn her, Maggie was on the other side, reaching down. The door slammed shut, and by the time I reached the door, a mere 2 meters away, she was screaming in unspeakable pain. It was a howling wail of horror and agony that terrified me so much I could feel the edges of my vision blur and turn black. My muscles became weak, and my stomach almost fell out of my backside. As it was, I could feel a warm stream of urine running down my thighs and calves. I wanted to push through. I wanted to throw myself against the door with all my anger and strength and rescue my friend. But my legs betrayed me. They shrieked to a halt, and before I realized what I was doing, I had turned on my heel and was fleeing in the opposite direction. The strangest plan formed in my mind. I can't say how or why it came to me, except that in the end, it was probably the only plan that saved me. The pile of corpses, however horrific, was large enough to allow access in some places. One particular spot came to mind, a small nook just big enough for one person. But I lunged towards it, running quickly into the room and crawling on my stomach to slide under the putrid mountain of bodies. The sensation of icy fingers sliding along my trouser legs, snagging on my pockets, and poking my chest and back was enough to almost make me cry out. And when one of those fingers broke off and came to rest on the back of my neck, growing damp and clammy from the warmth, I had to fight to keep myself from vomiting. I managed to wrench a few arms free from their places and cover myself as best I could. And then I lay there, suddenly aware of the dreadful, deafening silence of the ship. The weight of my decision to flee settled in for long seconds, and I was forced to contemplate the puddle of urine still soaking into my underwear. I could have been there for hours, or maybe just a few minutes. In the grand scheme, it was just a moment, though it didn't feel that way. Finally, something echoed from the corridor, and I heard the dreadful hiss of a door swinging open. Horrible voices spoke in some form of old German English, making my stomach churn with their guttural sounds and inhuman rhythm. Whatever I saw moving through was not human. I could say that for sure. But it also wasn't in my sight long enough for me to say what it was. I thought there might have been two. I wasn't sure. I might have blacked out because the next thing I remembered was Maggie's face staring at me in horror. Her mouth was stuffed with straw, just like Sebastian, and her eyes had been cruelly carved out. Except unlike Sebastian, she was sweating and trembling, occasionally letting out a small, quivering moan of confused pain. I knew it couldn't be, but I swear she was looking at me. I swear she knew I was there. She began to thrash, and that amused her captors. One of them moved towards her convulsing body and, still smiling, leaned down and affixed a small red bow to her forehead. It mumbled something to its companion, and together they dragged her towards the stairs. I couldn't see what happened next, but I never saw her again. There was no sign of her in the ship or anywhere else. There was a little rope lying on the deck, and I imagined she had been tied up and dragged up to be taken back to the workshop. I was in there for 2 days, and eventually hypothermia got the better of me. By the time the second expedition team arrived and pulled me out, screaming in horror when I first cried out upon hearing their voices, the corpses around me had begun to fuse with my skin. It tore away like duct tape, leaving long streaks of black, necrotic flesh underneath. 2 fingers on my left hand were missing, 2 on my right. I still have respiratory problems, and my remaining fingers have lost all but the most basic coordination. That at least ended my smoking habit. My story wasn't exactly met with the warmest reception. The official story was that Sebastian had gotten lost hiking to the second signal, which was later determined to be nothing more than an anomaly by subsequent scans. And without a guide, the rest of us suffered severe hypothermia and hallucinated badly. The blood-stained snow along the Pina's hull raised some suspicion, all pointing towards me. And eventually, I had to leave my position at the university after rumors that I had killed Craig and Maggie in a moment of delirious camp fever refused to die. I don't think it helped that when I first woke up and pulled my face free from the frozen log underneath, I left a patch of my right cheek behind. I still look like a ghost, scaring even myself when I look in the mirror. I don't celebrate Christmas anymore, that's for sure. It's not an issue for some people. As we approach another festive season, I'm forced to revisit this terrible adventure again and again. And now, as if to make it worse, someone has taken delight in taunting me. I received a package, a simple paper-wrapped box with a familiar string tied neatly around it in a bow. It was small, much smaller than the one that had contained Sebastian's head, and it opened to reveal one of my missing fingers. Quite possibly left behind when they tore me free from my frozen tomb. I thought it would be there, a small piece of me locked forever in that nightmarish cave, frozen next to some medieval sailor. There was even a small tag, Elwinster Swine. The words sent a shiver down my spine. "You forgot this, old friend," it read. My team was hired to refit an abandoned cruise ship. What happened to the passengers will haunt me forever. I raised my voice on deck so everyone could hear clearly. There were 4 of us. I stood at the front, the other 3 sprawled on sun loungers. "All right," I said, What have we got so far? She sat up straight, running a hand over her shaved head. The anchor's busted. I'm not sure we can even pull it up. It's been sitting there for 30 years, it won't be easy to budge, but we need to pull it up, I replied. Especially if we plan on towing this ship into dock. If we have to, he said, we could cut it, but I'm not sure we have strong enough tools. Let me talk to Qasim's people, I replied. What about the rudder? Fine, Gareth answered. The rudder's no problem. Anything else? Charlie crossed her booted legs and sighed. We found a leak in the bottom hold. It's flooded, but we don't know why the water level has remained so still. A leak is bad news, Gareth groaned. Yes, I said. Go down and check it out. Charlie Cole, are you ready to dive? Ready, they replied. Charlie added, dive suits are on. Good, I nodded. Let's go. Charlie and Cole left. Of all of us, they had the toughest job, and seeing the determination on their faces as they descended below deck, I knew they were serious about this. I nodded approvingly to Gareth as he walked over. He handed me a cup of coffee, and we began to carefully cross the open deck where we stood. On the surface, this had once been the sunbathing area, with a bar right next to it. Now, all the furniture was just scattered wreckage across the floor. They're good people, I said. They're handling everything very well. Actually, on paper, it looks pretty good, doesn't it? Gareth said. We were hired before any other team and sent on board alone. Our job was to prepare a preliminary inventory by the time the buyer's team arrived. Then we'd organize and manage the repairs based on the initial reports. Right, I replied. I agree, except for this. Nothing about this place feels comfortable. Does it? Gareth asked. I have to say it does. Look at this mess. I picked up an old handbag lying on the floor. I know it was a sudden evacuation, but I'm not sure the captain really went as crazy as the rumors say. You think something else happened? Gareth asked, raising an eyebrow at me. This place is genuinely creepy, but I keep thinking it's just my nerves. I don't know, I shrugged and tossed the bag onto the floor. It would be easier to understand if this was a scandal, you know? If there were newspaper articles and interviews with angry passengers standing on some dock, their hair still dripping wet, complaining about the captain abandoning ship for no reason. I handed him the wallet I'd taken from the handbag, opening it to reveal a faded driver's license. I just get a weird feeling looking at stuff like this. I know it was 30 years ago, but there must be something online, right? The rescue operation must have been huge. You think there's some kind of conspiracy? I don't know, I said. This place is just strange, very strange. It's just nerves, he replied, trying to make us both feel a little less tense. Besides, I mean, we're already here, aren't we? Yeah, I nodded. You're probably right, just nerves. Gareth chuckled at my use of the word probably. I have to go, he said. This conversation isn't helping me at all. I waited for him to leave, yelling a final thank you for the coffee. He waved goodbye and I watched him turn the corner. As he disappeared, I opened the wallet again and rummaged through the pile of papers. Most were old bills, but something caught my eye. An old, folded square of tissue paper, seemingly from a dining table. It was wrapped around an old dinner knife, the tip broken off and missing. I unfolded it and found a message written in old lipstick. The handwriting was desperate, the letters jagged and crude. They hurt me, it read. What the hell, I whispered. Get up here now. Gareth's voice, coming through the radio on my hip, was small and distant. I was alone. What is it? I asked. You have to come up, it's insane, you won't. Damn it, he muttered. All right, where are you? Top deck. Is the ship still there? I yelled before resigning myself to a short trip. This had better be worth it. But as I climbed all the way to the top deck, I found the place empty. The lounge chairs were stacked towards the stern, and the sun-faded parasols, tattered and decaying, lay scattered across the floor. Occasionally, a gust of wind caught a patch of torn fabric, and it fluttered like a broken-winged bird. The sudden sound struck a deep chord within me. Most of this deck was occupied by a large swimming pool, its surface coated with murky scum, disturbed only by old foam toys and deflated beach balls strangely drifting in the wind. Each was a blurred mass covered in algae, gliding across the choked waters like patient predators. Directly ahead was a water slide, a multicolored, twisted plastic tube rising 30 feet high. It looked faded and gray, covered in green algal spots. Halfway up, a section became transparent, offering what was once an enticing view of the sea. Something caught my eye up there. And to get a better look, I walked around the edge of the pool until the acrylic caught the sunlight and I could see through. There was a dark, blurred shape, which, if I squinted just right, looked large enough to be a person. Suddenly, the radio crackled, and I only caught the end of Gareth's voice. "Help!" Choked. "Damn it!" The shape moved silently close to the hard plastic, looking as if someone was stuck up there. "Is that him?" I wondered. "Gareth, where are you? Top deck, just here?" It had to be him, I decided, and I didn't know how to feel about that. Surely I wanted to be angry. I had to assume it was him, right? There was no one else, so it had to be him. And that meant I had to crawl up there and help him out. And that, I guess, is where my thoughts began to run like candle wax. Because climbing up there was the most terrifying thing I could imagine. It wasn't just the danger I was worried about. It was this place. Even just walking around the pool, stepping delicately over old swimwear and dropped champagne glasses, I felt like at any moment something would lunge out and drag me down, and I would disappear into that murky, opaque water. The pool would be as still as ever in a few seconds, and if anyone came looking, they would never know I was even there. They would never even know what happened. "Gareth," I yelled as I reached the bottom of the ladder. This is an incredibly stupid thing you've done." I was sure I was alone here, I told myself. Except for Gareth, I knew it because nothing else made sense. No one else was on the ship but us. And if I was alone, I had to help, there was no question. He could be seriously injured by the time I went to get the others. Any feelings I had about the dark waters were irrational, like the old church I had to walk past as a child. It only looked scary. This place asterisk looked scary, but it was dead, lifeless, nothing to be afraid of. So I stepped onto the first rung and immediately realized the terrible noise that shaking scaffolding made. Every step on the ladder rattled the entire metal and plastic slides like an earthquake, and I had to summon all my courage to climb up there. I'm not usually afraid of heights, but up there, you feel like you're standing on a collapsing tower. Every slight tilt of the ship was magnified 1,000-fold, so much so that even I began to feel a bout of seasickness. Without thinking, I crawled towards the pipe entrance and squeezed my head in first, hoping to get it all over with. The plastic was dry and my hands gripped easily, which was a good thing. I pulled myself forward at a fair pace, uncomfortably aware that this narrow tube was made for bodies much smaller than mine. I couldn't imagine why Gareth thought it was a good idea to climb in, and I spent most of the time muttering curses inside. The frustrated swearing was a pleasant enough release to keep me going until I reached the transparent acrylic section of the tube. Somehow, the space in front of me was empty. I had reached the middle of the section only to find a scratched view of the cloudy sky. For a moment, I replayed the events in my head. Did I see what I thought I saw? Or had he somehow gotten out, but there was no way he could have climbed down? With the way the slide was rattling, I would have noticed, and he certainly didn't come my way. But the evidence was right there, he wasn't there. I was alone, or at least I hoped so. "Gareth," I yelled, "what the hell are you playing at?" I don't know why I yelled. I didn't want to hear the answer, not even from Gareth. What I wanted, what was slowly blossoming in my mind like a star, overshadowing all other thoughts, was to get the hell out of there. But something responded. A thump, a loud and angry sound emanating from the very bottom of the pipe out of sight. And I didn't just hear it, I felt it. The pipe vibrated, the vibrations traveling up my arms. Another thump and my entire body locked up in terror. Something was coming. My skin went cold, my scalp tightened, and my heart began to skip beats. There were a few tentative thumps before they exploded into a gallop, its owner hurtling up the slide with unseen fury. Something inside me finally broke. I began to backpedal in a crab-like fashion, not even bothering to turn around. But now my hands found nothing to grip. The plastic, once firm, was now smooth and slick. And I couldn't get enough purchase to pull myself up. I lost all coordination and had to fight with all my might just to stay in one place, my feet kicking black marks into the vinyl and my hands scraping against the plastic. I wanted to turn back, but I couldn't take my eyes off the bend in the pipe. What would emerge there? I wondered. What wet, foul thing was hurtling towards me? I don't know if it was sweat or just clumsiness, but eventually, what little grip I had left gave way. The pipe seemed steeper than ever, and gravity finally began to pull me down. For long, agonizing seconds, the plastic was like ice, and I was powerless to stop my movement. My mind went blank with terror, and every thought was incinerated and replaced with an almost hallucinatory state of desperation. I screamed all the way down, only to fall into that horrible green water with a thick, muffled splash. The water was like soup, too thick to splash. I broke the surface in a state of utter hysteria, gasping as I inhaled the putrid air. That organic soup had been stewing for 3 decades, and if I had to guess, I was the first thing to break the surface in a very, very long time. The result was almost intoxicating enough to push me to the brink of unconsciousness. But I fought to stay awake and struggled through that slimy muck, strands of hair clinging to my wrists and ankles with an almost living movement, and pulled myself over the edge of the pool to collapse onto the floor. I lay there, gasping, confused, and desperate, only to hear something else emerge from the pool next to me. Plop, the water looked undisturbed, but then again it always did, didn't it? It was barely water anymore, more like a tangled mess of slimy weeds and algae suspended in goo. There was something in there, I knew it. It was an irrational thought, one of many I'd had in the last few minutes. But God, I was sure there was something in that damn water. Another sound, a piercing hiss, the sound of a child's wet slide. I looked up and saw the mouth of the water slide surrounded by dozens of pale hands, child-sized hands. Their owners lurked out of sight in the darkness. I ran, screaming, off that deck, unable to wait any longer, unwilling to risk seeing who or what would emerge from that water. Gareth found me lowering my bag onto our yacht deck below. My clothes were foul and soaking wet. I jumped when he called my name, and he ran over, a look of concern on his face. "We're leaving," I said as soon as he was within earshot. "We're getting the hell out of here now. Call Cole, call Charlie. Let's go." I saw Gareth was about to tell me something urgent, but then the state of my clothes caught his eye and he stopped. "What happened?" he asked. I don't know," I said. "Did you radio me up to the top deck?" He shook his head. "No." "Did you talk to me at all this morning, after the meeting?" "No." "So you haven't been in contact with—" "What are you talking about?" he asked. "I haven't radioed you once. What the hell happened to you? Did you go for a swim?" he asked incredulously. "Not voluntarily," I replied, "and I wasn't alone." "What do you mean?" "This place is insane," I said. "There's something on this ship, and it just attacked me, and I'm not giving it a second chance. Call Charlie and Cole before they dive. Tell them we're leaving in 20 minutes. Gareth's face darkened. "Cole hasn't surfaced," he said. "They went down, but he never came back, and Charlie's down there unconscious. I didn't want to move her, but I don't know what happened." "Did someone attack you up there? Do you think they hurt Cole?" I didn't have time to explain everything to Gareth, so I grabbed him and tried to give him a quick summary as we rushed to where Charlie was below. He kept poking holes in my story along the way, and God, it made me so angry. I had to guess he was just trying to rationalize it, but I felt he was probably missing the point. We weren't alone, and that's all I needed to drive my butt towards the horizon. When we reached Charlie, I thought I must have scared him a bit. He looked shaken, but I wasn't sure he believed my story word for word, as if he thought I might have slipped and hit my head on the way down the slide. Not that it mattered. One thing I was reminded of as we found Charlie changing out of her wetsuit, she was in a frantic hurry. "We have to get out of here right now," she yelled, rushing towards us with her gear in her hands. "We can't leave," Gareth said. "We have to find Cole." "No," Charlie shook her head. "He's gone, whatever the hell is down there. It took him, we have to go." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Sure," she replied. "I tried, believe me I tried, but he's gone. Let's go," I said. "For God's sake, let's get out of here." A shiver ran down my spine. When we reached the railing, we saw nothing but the gray water looking up. Confused, I reached out and grabbed the rope almost to test the truth before my eyes. Just a moment ago, I was climbing this rope and loading things onto the yacht below. By definition, the yacht had to be somewhere near the rope. They simply had to be together. So how could there be one without the other? We stood there in stunned silence until Gareth finally spoke. "What happened down there, Charlie?" he asked. "What the hell is going on?" "Forget it," I said as Gareth tried the backup radio for the umpteenth time that hour. "We know Qasim's people will be here sooner or later." "It's stupid," he yelled. It worked this morning, everything worked. Why is it broken now? We have a radio, a backup for the backup, 4 different satellites. It's this place, Charlie said, hugging her knees to her chest as she took a long drag from her cigarette. It's got us right where it wants us. What the hell does that mean? Gareth demanded. You know exactly what I mean, she said. I've been very clear. Something took Cole. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. I can't even say what it was. He could have gotten stuck on something, he replied. And we could. He's dead, Gareth. I found his mask. There could be an air pocket. He's dead, Charlie said, slowly retreating into herself, her eyes vacant. The leak we found has been repaired. We're not the first people to come here and try to patch it up. And whatever took the poor bastards before us, before they pumped the water out, will take us next. Charlie, I said, sitting down next to her with deep concern. It would help me a lot if we knew what we were dealing with. What else did you see? She shivered and took a long, slow breath. People, she said. Or corpses, a lot of them. I'd guess about 2, maybe 3 dozen, all crew members. Small white uniforms, gray and rotting in the water. I saw a few officers down there. They were just bones, so at first they looked like coral until I got closer. That's where I found Cole's mask, protruding from the old ribs and femurs as if it had always been there. But it was definitely his. All those skeletons were piled against a wall as if the people had crawled towards it. Something was painted on it. Maybe. I don't know. It looked scorched, as if a fire had been lit there. I couldn't look for long. Seeing that mask, the skeletons, we're not alone. I know you don't believe me, but I'm telling you the truth, we're not alone. I wasn't alone in that water. Something was moving, currents. You could feel them crawling over your skin, and shadows that never stayed still. There's something down there, just out of sight, always just out of my damn sight. It kept making me circle around until my air was almost gone. If I had kept trying to find it and actually put my hands on it, I would have drowned down there too. Do you know the last thing Cole said before he disappeared? Before something took him right before my eyes? He said, someone. Something in Charlie's story burrowed right into my head. I could almost see the place, all those dead skeletons trying to crawl towards God knows what. I could feel the deathly silence hanging in the water. Motherfucker, was all I could say, muttering under my breath. So what do we do now? Gareth asked, and that's when someone knocked on the door. Room service, the voice said. It was Cole's. Sir, I was asked to bring you room service. Complimentary. I couldn't believe my eyes. Cole was standing just outside the door, his back straight, his hands at his sides. A trolley full of covered silver dishes was next to him. He looked paler than ever, like a powdered corpse. He was trembling, and a thin bead of sweat ran across his forehead, his eyes fixed on some distant point behind me. Cole, Charlie heard me say his name, and she immediately rushed past, pushing me aside. She saw it was him, really him, but before she got close, something stopped her. It was the same thing that had kept me frozen at the threshold. He didn't really look like himself. It was him, certainly. But he looked like he had been through hell, like he was watching his child's coffin being lowered into the grave. He kept licking his lips as if he was about to say something, only he didn't seem sure what to say. Cole, what happened to you? Quite a selection, sir, he said, placing his hands on the trolley handle. It's complimentary. His words were stiff, like a poorly memorized script. For some reason, I imagined a hostage speaking into a phone with a gun to their head. That's exactly how he looked. He was expecting something from us, I was sure, but I couldn't tell what. Now Gareth was behind me, just as confused as we were. Charlie smiled as if she was about to burst into tears. Then he turned stiffly and walked away. We exchanged brief, confused glances and immediately gave chase, calling and yelling for him to stop, but he only sped up. He moved fast, too. Every time we got close, he would turn a corner. And by the time we rounded it, he was far down the corridor, but he never ran. He was always impossibly far after every turn, as if he was sprinting out of sight and slowing to a leisurely walk every time we got close. But why? I thought. What the hell was he playing at? The chase didn't last long. He soon vanished from sight, and we were left alone in an endless red velvet corridor, just like all the others. I tried to see where he could have gone, but it was useless trying to find him. He could be anywhere. In frustrated silence, we returned to the room, only to suddenly remember the trolley he had left behind. We opened each lid and found the dishes covered in putrid scum. The food was so rotten you couldn't even tell what it once was. Why would he want us to eat this? Gareth asked. Was that really him? "I want to see the kitchen," I said. "I want to know where this came from." The food had been ladled out of putrid bags in the back. Vacuum-sealed packages of old beef were torn open and slopped onto cracked ceramic plates in a frenzy. You could see where he had dropped plates and old meat and had to start over. You could also see half a dozen syringes scattered across the floor, and on a countertop was an old tool kit filled with every kind of sedative you could imagine. It was an old, rusty thing, but a faint stain in one of the cupboards near the back told me it had always been a fixture of that kitchen. I couldn't help but think of the scrap of paper I'd found in the old handbag. They hurt us. The bastard had tried to poison us. "Do you think he's gone crazy?" Gareth asked. "I think we have work to do," I replied. "I think we need to go back to the room and take stock of the supply situation. I also think we need to arrange night shifts." "So you think he wants to hurt us?" Gareth nodded towards the toolbox. "I don't understand what happened to him. We've known him for years." "I don't think it's him we need to worry about," Charlie replied. "It's whatever got into him. Something is killing, I'm sure of it." I stayed up late, watching the others, and there was something in the room emitting a low hiss of white noise. Gareth and Charlie were both asleep, and I was halfway through my midnight shift. At 4:00 a.m., Gareth would wake up and take over, and I would finally get some rest. But until then, it was just me and my thoughts, and the disturbing, deep sound of coal occasionally shuffling somewhere far off. And that hiss. I wished I could figure out where it was coming from, but I was hesitant to wander around and wake the others. God, we were all stressed enough without me worrying about trivial things. I tried to focus on the front door, hoping whoever else was on this ship would leave us alone. At least we had plenty of supplies. We had brought enough for the entire trip, which we owed to Gareth's particularly anxious mind. He always did things like that, stashing enough food for twice the journey and always carrying backups for the backups. I silently thanked him as I drank a bottle of Coke. I paused with the bottle to my lips, listening to the carbonated bubbles hiss on my lips. I lowered the bottle and twisted the cap. The hiss subsided but didn't disappear, and when I shook the bottle, it intensified into a high-pitched whistle. Carefully examining the cap, I noticed a tiny hole in the plastic. It was so small that when I tilted the bottle, nothing spilled out, but when held upright, the pressure was high enough to force a small stream of gas out. "What the hell?" I mumbled aloud for the first time in hours. Only my words sounded a little slurred and my lips felt a little weak. I thought of the syringes in that kitchen, of the massive amounts of sedatives stored there. I rushed to the stack of bottles we had and began pulling them out, cursing as my legs became weak and sluggish. Every bottle had a small needle hole in the cap. "My friends," I whispered. My limbs were so numb I had to crawl to the two sleeping figures. "Charlie." I reached out and shook her, but she didn't wake. She was so deeply asleep she almost looked lifeless. We had all eaten and drunk from that source. We assumed we were safe because it was our stuff. But of course, Cole would have known about it. "Dead," I yelled, falling backward, and felt the world begin to spin around me. The last thing I heard was the door opening and Cole muttering something under his breath. "He's hungry." "Dave, wake up." I had to fight to pull myself up. I was left on the floor where I fell, my neck and shoulders aching. Slowly, I realized I hadn't left the room, and I wondered if I had dreamed the whole thing. Then Charlie spoke again, and the nightmare was reenacted. "He's gone, Dave," Charlie yelled. "Damn it, he's gone. Gareth's gone." I looked around and saw his sleeping bag empty. "He drugged us," I mumbled, grabbing a nearby bottle and showing Charlie the injected cap. "Look." "Oh, damn it," she yelled, throwing the bottle against the wall, where it bounced harmlessly to the floor. "He must have come here while we were searching the kitchen." "We need to find him," I said. The ship's medical facility was small but cramped with chairs, tables, and dozens of old cabinets. When the ship was operational, there were probably a few nurses or a single doctor on board to treat minor injuries or illnesses. But if something serious happened, most cruise ships would simply turn around and take the injured passenger to port for medical care on land. So why did this one have an operating room? I wondered. When I first saw the gurney with its leather straps and overhead light, I thought I must have been mistaken. But it was undeniable. Containers filled with nitrogen and other gases, trolleys full of rusty scalpels. God, the drain on the floor to catch blood. This wasn't a conventional professional operating room. The straps to restrain people on the table made that very clear. It was a small, cramped space, with no room to move or do anything but lay someone down horizontally and start cutting without a thought for the consequences. The entrance had been obscured behind old, fallen filing cabinets, and you had a strong feeling you were standing in a place that was supposed to be kept secret. It was Gareth's screams that led us to the place. We never found him, at least not right then, but we chased those high-pitched cries for help from one end of the ship to the other until we finally tracked them to this tiny space. Charlie said, "We must have been too late," and I didn't have the courage to say anything else after that. The overhead light was on when we first entered. The door lock was open and lying on the floor. And along that table were small grooves filled with blood slowly dripping down to the floor, ready to run into the drain. Yes, I thought, we were too late. We didn't find much else to suggest what had happened to Gareth, but we did find an old doctor's bag with papers stuffed inside. It didn't make much sense, but reading it, God, you got a terrible feeling you were reading the product of a twisted or broken mind. SS passengers will be ready for collection from 02 hours. Do not return later than 4 hours. Sleeping passenger with companion, observations show both wake early. Passenger Lauren will be ready for collection from 02 hours. Passenger Lauren in single occupancy, observations show she sleeps late due to drinking alcohol at night. Effects of hangover can be used to mask effects of sedatives. Prepare her cabin appropriately upon her return. Passenger Jacobson will be ready for collection from 12:14 hours. Passenger Jacobson will be with Children's Care Facility on Deck 3. Crew member Pheland will prepare Passenger Jacobson for collection. No use of sedatives necessary due to passenger's age. Report of behavioral issues will be prepared for parents returning at 18 hours. If parents seek to escalate, matter can be brought to medical department where appropriate documentation and diagnosis will be fabricated to minimize impact of Passenger Jacobson's story. Passengers Morris, Athley, and Subden have been selected for further observation in case they are not suitable for collection. Passengers WLE, Deepson, and Zillett remain potential options. Further note, crew member Eileen Tunn has filed a report with the captain. She has expressed concerns about the safety of children on board, citing several mentions of the hungry man. This is the third report since she joined the crew 4 months ago following complaints regarding staff, kitchen, and medical. Report has been suppressed. Crew member Tunn has been reprimanded for inappropriate behavior with passengers. This was just one of dozens and dozens of sheets, and if I had to guess, there were probably hundreds more somewhere on this ship. They weren't dated, but you still got a twisted sense of chronology. Passenger Donaghey will be ready for collection from 02 hours. Passenger Donaghey will undergo her third collection since the start of her voyage and has therefore stopped eating meals prepared by crew. Cannot be sedated, prepare appropriately for resistance. Passenger Nguyen will be ready for collection from 14:30-15 hours. Observations show Passenger Nguyen rarely separated from spouse. Formal complaints or inquiries regarding Passenger Nguyen's whereabouts will be directed to complicit members of medical department and officers. Room service staff are on standby to provide as yet unidentified third candidate for collection from 06 hours. Further note, the captain has escalated the situation. His potential for disruption is significant. We cannot direct the ship to return to port and pick up new passengers. He has reported fictional hull damage and drawn significant attention from the Coast Guard. The company is working to rectify the situation. Passenger population will return to normal in coming weeks. I handed the last sheet to Charlie and waited for her to read. I don't like that phrase, the company, I said. I don't like that hungry man thing, she replied. What is this place? I shook my head in confusion and picked up another sheet. This one was significantly shorter. Crew member Phylan will be ready for collection at 6 hours. Crew should maintain vigilance for collection opportunities among remaining passengers. Some activity has been reported in children's playroom on Deck 3. Surviving passengers have proven difficult to collect, even the children. He gives as well as takes, they have changed. Further note, due to paltry sacrificial items, Decks 2 and 3 are forbidden. Unlikely he will be satisfied with current supply. All remaining crew should prepare for spontaneous collection. Do not resist him. The company reports that efforts to return the ship to full operation are underway, but significant resources are being diverted to suppressing any information leaks following the recent evacuation. We must endure this period of scarcity with fortitude. It seems not everyone got off the ship, I said, handing it to Charlie without looking. Some of the crew stayed, and some passengers too. I think this place had something like a cult. Only Charlie wasn't listening. She had wandered over to a nearby table and, opening drawers at random, had found another piece of paper. It was shaking so violently in her hands that I had to reach out and take it to read the writing. She didn't even resist. She just stared at her empty hands, her eyes wide and glistening. Passenger Gareth Jones will be ready for collection from 204 hours. Observations show passenger will not sleep alone. Sedatives have been prepared for entire party. Crew member Cole to await sedative to take effect. Further note, passenger Seb has joined the crew. This represents a significant increase in current staffing levels. Expect passengers Jones, Wallis, and Mitchell to join the crew in the next week. It has been a long time. We have given so much. And so has he. His gifts are painful. We had barricaded the room as best we could, but it didn't do much good. This time it wasn't Cole or even Gareth as I suspected, but something else, something that made no pretense of being anything other than a monster. A small, dripping, skittering thing with broken bones and sagging skin, gleaming in the moonlight like rotting flesh. It silently pulled our door open with heavy, wet breaths in the darkness. You could smell its hunger, its desperation. It didn't moan or cry or roar. It just worked towards its prey like a predator, its determination driven by nothing more than an unconscious animalistic instinct. It was in the room within minutes. We could hear it tearing through the supplies we had brought. Suitcases were thrown against walls, and tool bags were emptied. Its breathing became faster and more strained as the thing continued to search for us. Meanwhile, we hid in a two-door cabinet, then huddled together in the dark bathroom, holding our breath. Only once did I risk a glance out the door to see what was tearing our room apart, and that single glimpse almost turned my mind to jelly. Whatever was out there looked human in its general outline, but the resemblance ended there. I couldn't help but think of what we had read. Is this what happens after so many collections? I wondered. Is this what would happen to Cole and Gareth if we left them behind? Is this what would happen to me? I didn't want those kinds of gifts. Charlie eventually fell asleep, but I never could. I had heard the thing wandering into the darkness, crying out in anger and terror. It had wanted to find us so much, and I knew on some level it would never stop. "Do you think it'll float?" she asked. "I'm ready to swim the rest of the way if I have to," I said, kicking the tiny lifeboat. We had cobbled it together from a couple of old double doors and a few empty barrels. It was desperate, but so were we. Besides, we're gambling on the radio and beacons suddenly working out of the water, which I'm fairly sure they will. "You think they can do that?" she asked. "Jam our calls for help." I thought of what I'd seen in the water slide, the tiny hands and the silent plop of something falling into the water. Yes. We hauled the raft over the side and waited for it to stabilize. Charlie was clutching the orange bag of supplies as if it were a child, and I couldn't blame her. Everything had taken a desperate turn, and all our hope rested on it. We were preparing to climb down when a huge, booming crash broke the silence. It sounded like a circuit breaker, like a massive machine starting up. Before we could turn our heads, we found ourselves bathed in amber light, and the entire ship flared to life in a grotesque mockery of vitality. "Go," Charlie yelled, and we rushed to the rope ladder. She threw me the bag, and I climbed over first, and for a brief moment, Charlie and I faced each other. We had spent the entire night locked in that small room, unable to sleep or relax, and we had spent the entire day working on this final effort to escape. You could see the stress and horror written on her face. She looked like a frightened child, lost and alone in the darkness, and she couldn't even see what was behind her. I tried to yell out, tried to warn her, but before I could utter a word, she was snatched from in front of me. Whatever it was, it had lunged out from the nearby window, shattering glass and steel as if they were clay. It moved so fast I barely registered its existence on my retina, but the slightest blur was still enough to paralyze me on the ladder, my muscles locked with unspeakable terror. The hungry man. She vanished in an instant, and I was left with a choice. I looked down at the raft. It was still there, bobbing. It promised a chance to leave, a chance to get off that damn ship as I had wanted to from day one. Meanwhile, the ship continued to thrum with monstrous life, and looking up towards its moonlit silhouette, I caught a glimpse of an ancient, creaking body curled on the nearest rooftop. Its spider-like limbs twitched and poised to jump, waiting for me to turn back. It was like apocalyptic darkness. I took a deep breath and climbed down. They came back. The Coast Guard came back and looked for them. I told them not to bother, but they did anyway, unwilling or unable to believe my story. I hoped that more than a dozen people crawling from room to room would have a chance at safety, though I doubted the ship would easily give up fresh meat. Hearing myself tell them this was like hearing someone else speak. I talked about curses and hauntings like a raving lunatic suffering from sunstroke. I was surprised they even listened to me and tried to find the others. They treated me a little more seriously after that. Gareth was found in a random passenger cabin, sleeping under a blanket. I feared for the poor soul who first pulled back the blanket, only to find himself faced with a much-changed Gareth. At another time, the ship would have taken its toll of flesh and carefully distributed the burden among many passengers each day with a constant rotation of new arrivals at each port. If I had to guess, what happened to Gareth was a pride of hungry lions tearing apart a contorted horse. Something violent and frantic. He died before they were 100 meters off the ship. I was grateful for that small mercy, though it was heartbreaking to know that Cole and Charlie would never know that peace. I had thought about going back, burning it to the ground, or blowing a hole below the waterline and letting it sink. Only I couldn't get near the water anymore, and the thought of seeing that ship loom on the horizon. I couldn't go back any more than I could fly to the moon. I simply couldn't go back. Qasim acted as if I had done him a favor. He firmly believed me when I told him it was haunted, and he offloaded it as quickly as he could to some poor sap from Bangladesh. Just a little digging revealed it was just a shell corporation for a company he owned. I'm not sure he was as innocent as he claimed. But then, I'm not sure that even matters. I eventually found an old passenger, a middle-aged woman who had been there as a child. She seemed normal, or at least fairly normal. But when I mentioned the hungry man, she lost all composure and descended into a state of utter hysteria. Her husband threatened me and forced me out, but I guess that wasn't what bothered me too much. It was the fact that her children started crying too. And for the briefest moment, I felt a shadow pass over me, and the room became a little darker. And I saw something out of the corner of my eye, the kind of thing a madman might even want to worship as a god. His gifts are painful. I remembered those words clearly. Whatever had happened to those passengers, I think they carried a small piece of it back with them, carrying it inside like contraband out into the world. Being able to hear other people's thoughts was already frightening enough, but what I heard when I was alone was what truly terrified me the most. You know what's funny? Humans have the ability to project their thoughts into invisible waves across space, and they have special organs to receive those invisible waves. It's called talking and listening. Humans take that for granted. You only hear what people want you to hear, and there's a reason for that. Getting past that barrier isn't some superpower. It's not great to see the connection between everything you do and the immediate emotional reaction it causes in those around you. You don't need to see the wave of disappointment rolling through your father's mind when you hand him an A-grade test paper. You don't need to feel how your lover feels when they see you in faded boxers and mismatched socks. Lying is good. You should be happy with those lies because a human being is not just the sum of their thoughts. The fleeting glimpse of revulsion a partner feels when they catch you violently vomiting into the toilet after eating unsanitary takeout, that's not them. The fact that they push that revulsion aside and still help you up, that's who they really are. I hate seeing these things. I hate feeling the intrusive thoughts of others, the parts they can't filter, the parts they choose to ignore or lock away. Sometimes I get word for word, but I have to focus very hard. Most things look like swirling colors all around me, though I think that's actually just a metaphor I use to make it easier for you to understand. It has elements of taste, smell, touch, and even sound too, all rolled together. Envy tastes bitter. Is like the ringing of a guitar, harmonizing the world around it into a peaceful song. Hatred looks like the aftermath of a terrible burn, flesh pitted, blisters glistening, cramping pain. Sexual thoughts almost have a rhythm, but it depends on the person. Some people have a pneumatic drill pounding in their heads. For others, it's more like waves crashing on a shore. It would be better if I knew I could help others, but I'm not a superhero. I get a lot of things just walking down a crowded street. There's always someone being hit or forced or abused or punched or stabbed or, oh God, there's always something happening. Once on some long road in the Manchester suburbs, I heard a cry for help. Rather, a prayer. Rarely do I get such a clear signal like something you'd pick up on a car radio. This wasn't a messy mix of sensations. It was words, a long litany screamed into the desperate void with the faint hope that God was listening. I spent weeks driving up and down those roads. I stayed in a nearby hotel, stopping my journey, my life, everything, in the hope of finding this poor person. I climbed fences and searched gardens. I broke into houses when people were at work. I was arrested twice, but the police wouldn't listen. Please let me die. Please let me die before he comes back. I'm so hungry. He feeds me so little. Please let me die. I never heard them again, never found out where they were or what might be happening. The closest I ever came to finding a clue was a faint wisp of desperation floating in the air just outside an old brick building deep in the woods. It was small, actually a shed, but it had thick walls, and inside were thick iron pipes sprouting from the ground and then disappearing back into it. Perhaps it was related to a drainage system. Everywhere there were signs prohibiting entry. There was something in the stains on the floor that gave me a terrible feeling, and perhaps it was just my imagination. But looking at those iron pipes, I couldn't help but picture someone handcuffed to them. I eventually gave up. Whoever they were, they had stopped praying. I never heard them again. I've had to stop trying to help others. Generally, many doctors have advised me to be institutionalized for my own safety, as have several judges. I think luck, and not much more, has kept me free on the streets. This power of mine isn't X-Men. It doesn't just lead me to damsels in distress so I can kick down doors and save them. That would be like pointing at a wave and tracing it back to its origin point. Most of the time, all I can do is listen and walk away. And even listening can be dangerous. Not everyone wants to be heard. The funny thing about psychopaths is that despite being completely self-absorbed, they aren't as immersed in their own world as everyone else. That's because they can't imagine they might need to share it. The world is theirs to enjoy, a big, complex puzzle game full of challenges. And people are just pieces. They move for fun, they're sensitive to everything around them, and they are always, always, always on the lookout. Sometimes to find victims, sometimes to learn more about the lumps of flesh they call others, and sometimes because they're afraid of being caught. A sharp intake of breath almost killed me. A single mistake taught me forever to be careful how I react to other people's thoughts. I was on the subway at the time, observing people as I usually did. When I was a child, a young man had been in the same car as me for about half an hour. At the time, he seemed much older to me, but looking back, he was probably only 19. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, but I knew he was projecting his mind throughout the entire train car, drinking in the world. The stained seats, the rattling windows, the streaked, opaque floors. He observed them like a cat observing a street. He only pretended to stare at the floor, pretended to be indifferent to the others. I was too young to recognize the signs. I just thought he was a different kind of person. His thoughts tasted bland, empty of recognizable emotions, but filled with incredible detail. He was immersed in the process of appearing harmless, just as I was immersed in soaking up his thoughts. It was only when the train slowed and the doors opened that his thoughts changed. Of course, no one else could see it. A young woman stepped into the car, and his mind suddenly exploded. There was recognition, anticipation, fear, excitement, desire, and something I later learned was a particular kind of anger. It was like this guy had been sitting there waiting to see the world in gray, but now he was seeing it in vivid color. Some signal had been fed into that robotic brain, and it came alive with malicious intent. It wasn't just what he wanted to do to this woman that brought him to life, but the fact that he had planned it, and now he was waiting for the perfect moment to execute it. I gasped, overwhelmed by the frenzy pouring from his head, and he didn't move a muscle. Not once the entire time. But he heard. He knew the consequence of my action ripple through his mind like a single pulse of recognition. He didn't question or wonder how it could have happened. He simply knew that I had looked into his head. He knew it just as he knew the train would start moving again and I would be stuck there with him. His certainty in this situation was terrifying. He wasn't plagued by a gram of self-doubt. I jumped up, lunged towards the door, and in less than half a second, he was after me. The fact that I had somehow looked directly into his mind was no more interesting to him than a mole on my leg, a tiny detail he might mention as he rolled my naked corpse into a drain. Cruelty looks like blood. It spills from other people's minds and into mine like red wine from a jug. This guy made me feel like I was drowning. The worst part was knowing I couldn't go home. I was close, but I couldn't do it. This guy was an apex predator, and he would sit outside for days if he needed to, waiting until my mom or dad stumbled out in the early morning. He would watch, he would wait. I couldn't read his exact intentions, but it tasted coppery and warm to the touch. It made me think of licking a razor blade. I knew leading him home would be a criminal idea. I couldn't hide, so I had to run. I had to ditch him. I took a long detour around the city, through parks and alleys and markets with sizzling meat and produce on display, until finally, my legs felt like they were turning to powder and crumbling. I had to ditch him. I knew it. So at some point, I turned back and started heading towards the subway platform, the same one I had fled. I could feel the large crowds moving around, and I carefully timed my journey so that I stumbled down the stairs, catching the last passenger climbing onto a departing train. I reached the train car a few seconds before the doors closed, confident I had ditched him. When I turned around, he was standing there, his face blank. He hadn't flinched the entire chase, not once. He was barely even tired. If those doors hadn't closed just in time, if my timing had been off by a fraction, he would have been on that train with me. And I probably wouldn't be here to write this. Psychopaths are actually incredibly rare, thank God. In fact, they're the least of my worries now. The dead are a bigger problem for me. They're much harder to avoid. Cemeteries are an absolute no-go, but at least the long dead have the courtesy to stay silent. Their thoughts are like thin wisps of smoke. Recent deaths are a little more pronounced. I once drove past a car accident and passed out immediately. The police gave me a breathalyzer test because they thought I was drunk. Thankfully, I convinced them I just had a weak stomach and the blood-splattered windshield had upset me. They believed it. How could I explain to them that the psychic shock of death had knocked me unconscious? I had heard a man's death cry. I could feel the scream he hadn't had a chance to scream, as if it were stuck in my own throat. But that wasn't the whole story. The worst part was that he was still screaming. They couldn't hear it, but I could. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror as his body was being pulled out, and he started screaming not with his voice, but with his mind, with his soul. By the time I started the car, he had been screaming for over an hour. When the ambulance took his body away, he was still screaming. He would still be screaming at the morgue, and he would still be screaming when his family mourned him. And then he would scream for months. Perhaps years until finally the darkness and silence and complete absence of input of sensation would liquefy his mind, and that scream would dwindle until it was nothing more than a thin wisp of smoke. I highly recommend cremation, by the way. The journey is the same, but at least it's faster. Whatever cosmic energy grants us life, it has to return. You have to decompose dust to dust, right? That doesn't just mean the body, it means the soul itself. Better to go quickly. Because if the sound coming from a freshly buried coffin is anything to go by, it's terribly frightening. Everything is dying, all returning one way or another. There's something about the human mind that resists that decomposition. I think the process must be slightly different for everyone. Some places can even carry traces from things that happened long ago. You're familiar with the idea, I'm sure. The notion that a truly horrific death leaves behind a kind of ghost that then haunts the area. It's not uncommon. The strangest thing for me is that those thoughts are indistinguishable from the thoughts of a living person. The only difference is that they're not direct thoughts. They're recordings. Sometimes that means hanging out on a normal-looking hill and catching the faint breeze of an ancient Stone Age ritual, their cries uttered in a long-dead language. Sometimes it means hearing the Germanic slur of Old English as you cross a random street in London. In Scotland, there's even a place where you catch glimpses of ancient Roman battlefield shouts. Pretty cool. What's less cool is that sometimes you pick up a trace that doesn't belong to a human. You know what I mean? You know, everyone has a little bit of what I have. Have you ever just randomly hated something as a child? Often, it would be somewhere like, maybe the cupboard under the stairs, or the attic, or a well, or an old outhouse, or a spot in your garden where the patio tiles had peeled away and you could look down into the low crawl space under your house. That's not an overactive imagination. There are places where sunlight hasn't touched in a very, very long time. Old, abandoned houses in the middle of the woods. deep holes dug into the earth, the heart of ancient forests where the canopy is so thick and dense that nothing can grow on the rocky ground because it's perpetually night on the forest floor. You know those places, you don't need me to tell you about them. Every one of us has at some point encroached on a part of the world that just feels vulgar, even a little hostile. I used to hate the crawl space under the stairs in my first house. It was the way it receded into nothingness, the way the ceiling got lower and lower, but the floor went nowhere. And of course, it was dark, so dark you never saw the back of it. Even when I was a teenager, helping my dad clean out the house, I never took the time to look directly into the very back. I just pulled things out as best I could, reaching my fingers into the darkness with the faint hope that nothing would reach out towards me. When all but one box had been cleared out, I thought about maybe shining the brightest light I had inside. I was tempted to push back my childish fear and see that little nook fully exposed. I wanted to take that lifeless black hole and expose it to the light and see how truly mundane and boring it was. Because after all, it was just an overactive imagination, right? That's what my dad always told me when I came to him sobbing about nightmares of being dragged down there by angry, gripping hands. When I thought something had moved down there, a box rearranged, leaving a drag mark in the dust, a neatly folded coat now thrown across the floor, a toy I hadn't seen in years suddenly appearing right at the front of the mess. It was just my imagination telling me something had moved when it actually hadn't. There was always a mundane explanation, right? But when I finally got the chance to pull out that last pile of stuff and banish the darkness, I discovered that darkness isn't always silent. Whatever was down there had heard my thoughts, and it reached out with a message of its own. Just try it. The solidity of those thoughts still haunts me. It was how it felt, like holding a diamond in my hand. As if the words were made of the hardest thing on earth and would cut through my mind like a knife through butter if it wanted to. I had never had anything talk to me before. I had picked up a few words or phrases occasionally from others, but those were clear thoughts. They weren't messages sent with postage stamps and return addresses. They were more like graffiti in a public restroom. But those words were sent directly to me, laser-guided and straight into my skull. I can't begin to imagine what kind of mind sent them. If there was an image or sensation that accompanied those words, it was the taste of cobwebs and nothing else. God, it scared the hell out of me. I didn't raise my hand and challenge the darkness. Instead, I pulled out the last box and made sure never to look up. I was too afraid of what I might see. Funny thing is, on the drive home, my old man told me he was proud of me for cleaning out the crawl space. Not just because he knew I had been afraid of the place as a child, but even as an adult, he had to admit it scared the hell out of him. So many people like that. They have these little feelings they attribute to nothingness. I once hung out with a group of film students to help them shoot a final year project. The equipment was heavy, and I had a car, so that's how I got involved. Anyway, the director, the guy in charge, I guess, he wasn't a professional at all. He had found an old, half-burned house in the woods a few years prior and wanted to shoot some scenes there. We got lost out there looking for that house, the guy obsessed with it. Funny thing is, after a 3-hour hike to find the place, when we finally got there, no one bothered to go inside. I always thought that was quite remarkable. The first time I laid eyes on the place, I thought I would have to play tricks to prevent someone from going inside. I was near something intelligent, something ancient, something hungry. I don't know how a house can look evil, but it just did. I didn't want to be near it. To my surprise, no one else did either. The director took one look, and I could feel his artistic obsession melting away. He took a few pictures, awkwardly asking an actress to stand by the front door. And after a while, he just mumbled something about the light not being right, and we left. No one blamed him for it. We were all just grateful to put distance between ourselves and that house. If I have any moral lesson to impart, it's to follow your instincts. That guy was a staunch atheist, but he didn't try to prove to himself that the fear he felt near the house was irrational. He had nothing to gain by going into the house, and some part of him told him he had a lot to lose. So he didn't go in. How many lives were saved by that one decision? It's not always that simple. A few years ago, I helped out with a missing persons case. I don't mean the police came to me, and I held old scraps of fabric to sense the victim. I mean I saw a missing persons flyer and called the phone number and asked how I could help. There was a volunteer search party underway, and I wanted to be there. Even though my power isn't very useful, I just really felt like I needed to be part of that search team. Maybe it was because it was a little girl's face on the flyer, about 9 or 10 years old. Maybe it was because I had a gut feeling looking into her eyes, like they were steeped in ice water. And I had never felt that from a photograph. But I really wanted to help. The police thought the girl had gone missing in a large sand dune area near the sea. It was about 20 square miles of sand, dotted with grass, up and down, up and down. And you get the idea. It was a huge hilly area, and as soon as someone went over the edge of a dune, they disappeared from sight. Dogs got lost there all day, and there had been times when children were found shivering under some bush because they had lost sight of their parents playing on the beach. It made searching incredibly difficult. The terrain was awkward, a wilderness deliberately overgrown under strict environmental protection. Flash floods happen a lot, wiping out familiar trails overnight and replacing them with small ponds or simply flat, empty spaces, and new paths would spring up where the water cut through the earth like butter. And of course, the dunes themselves never stood still. They were waves on sand, moving too slowly for human eyes, but always moving. And sometimes that meant they would uncover things that had been buried for years, even decades, like, for example, an old military listening post set up during World War II and quickly forgotten. Of course, I didn't know what it was when I found it. What I saw as I stumbled through the darkness, calling out for this poor girl while hoping I didn't get lost myself, was a door in the middle of a hill. There's no other way to describe it, and it was as surreal as you might expect. Because I was in the middle of absolute wilderness when I swung my light around, and I saw an old doorway set into a rising sand dune. The doorknob, oh God, how can I describe it? It looked warm, as if it had just been touched recently. That's how my mind registered it. I just knew immediately upon looking at it that someone had curiously pulled that metal until the latch yielded, and the door swung open with an unearthly creak. When I tried the knob, it felt familiar in some way, as if its sound and feel had been imprinted on my memory. Looking inside, I saw a staircase descending 2 or 3 steps before it disappeared into the sand that had filled the tunnel like floodwater. It was a dead end that I desperately wanted to ignore, except something told me not to, and as I shuffled down, I noticed footprints in the sand. They were as clear as day, small footprints, smaller than my hand, making a stumbling gait. That made me look closer, though I certainly didn't want to. This place was radiating malice towards me, actually puffing up like a fugu fish threatening a predator. I didn't want to test it or push it. I wanted to leave it alone. But those footprints. I knelt and saw that the sand didn't reach the ceiling. The staircase descended about a meter and must have been level, because at one point I could shine my light straight through to the other side. Sand filled the staircase like water in a U-bend, and where the steps rose again, there was a gap. It would be arduous to crawl in there with 6 feet of sand beneath you and solid concrete directly above. But if you kicked and wriggled, you could dig your way through. And for a child, it would be even easier. But why would the little girl do that? I wanted to ignore it. I really did, but why was I out there? Certainly not for fun. I wanted to help, to make a difference. Perhaps on some level, I had sensed the place right in the coffee shop where I first saw her missing persons flyer. Perhaps that's why I came. I think the other searchers had passed that door and seen it and just walked away. They never consciously chose to ignore it. It just had an effect on you. Something that if you're not used to, you wouldn't understand. Perhaps I was the only one who could detect it. Fate sounds so grand sometimes, but even then I was incredibly doubtful. Anyway, I knew I had to go in. I tried to call the others, but the sea was less than half a kilometer away, and the wind blowing from it was incredibly fierce. My voice was snatched away by the howling wind, and no one came to help. I could catch glimpses of scattered lights here and there, but I didn't know if they were just over the next hill or too far away to help. Being able to hear people's thoughts, Part 4. I took a deep breath and knelt down. For a moment, I almost retreated. That's when my head entered the tunnel and I realized it was too small for me. I was suddenly seized by claustrophobia, and it was as if my entire body screamed, "You want me to go in there? Are you crazy?" But I had the shovel, didn't I? We all did. I picked it up and used it to clear away as much sand as possible. The work wasn't strenuous at all, but I still found myself sweating. Eventually, I cleared enough space and went back to kneeling. From there, I lay flat on my stomach and began to wriggle forward. My hands weren't much help as the sand yielded too easily, so I had to rely on my feet to push me further. As I said, it wasn't far, probably no more than 2 meters, but the way the roof pressed down on me, not to mention the feeling I got radiating from that darkness. I had to stop twice along the way and swallow down panic. The place wasn't silent either. Every time I stopped to regain my composure, it retaliated, and I saw images of the door slamming shut while I was trapped in a claustrophobic nightmare, squeezed between unstoppable concrete and a sticky wall of muddy sand. I saw my legs flailing, my hands unable to find purchase as the entire tunnel tightened around my abdomen like a curious child crushing an insect. It would keep me there. The search party would never find the door. They would never hear my cries. It would keep me pinned in the darkness, and it would delight in my tortured death. I could only hope it was just a scare. Something alive was down there, but not the tunnel itself. It couldn't force the door shut or rearrange the earth and rocks at will. I just needed to calm down and catch my breath. And as I did, I found I could wriggle free. On the other side, I crawled into a spacious room. It was dilapidated, with only a few holes in the walls and sagging electrical wires to indicate where equipment once was. There were fragments of old wood and metal on the floor, rusted beyond recognition. But it was wide open, devoid of anything meaningful. Whoever had cleared it out decades ago was probably the last person to ever disturb that room. Well, except for one person. The sand in this place was minimal, but scattered enough on the floor that I could see where there had been disturbance. The little girl had entered, certainly. And as I followed her path, it was clear she had passed through this room and through another doorway opposite where I stood. This tunnel actually descended, plunging through the earth and straight into pitch-black darkness. Standing on the stairs, I could hear the distant drip of water and the rustling echoes of my every breath and movement. The sound of my own blood in my ears was deafening. Death lived down there, plain and simple. You could smell it in the musty air. The demonic thing below didn't even have cobwebs or signs of rats. Anyone could stand there and feel something reaching into their mind, telling them to go anywhere else but down. To me, it felt like I was an ant who had just looked up and discovered a giant eye, framed by a magnifying glass, staring down at it. Something was watching me, something was looking straight at me just on the other side of those shadows. If I raised my light, I knew I would see something terrible looking back at me. "Just try it," it laughed. I had met this thing before. With trembling hands, I raised my light and saw nothing. For a moment, I almost laughed. Was I just imagining it? I wondered. Had all those times hearing inhuman thoughts just been an overactive imagination? I desperately wanted to believe that. No one had ever wanted to be alone as much as I did in that moment, except the staircase wasn't entirely empty. There was a shoe, a small one, a bright-colored sneaker, the kind that would fit on a little girl's foot. The laughter caught in my throat. I felt unsure of myself. Did I really hear those taunting thoughts echoing from the darkness? Did it matter? I had to go down, I had to see. I descended step by step until I reached the bottom. My first instinct was to check the space ahead, to look further into the darkness. The small, wet, dripping space that greeted me was as dilapidated as the room above, except down here, the walls weren't clean. Perhaps water had flowed down and coated them in layer after layer of organic-looking lime. Whatever it was, it gave the tunnel a slightly distorted appearance, as if the very laws of perspective were twisted by the darkness. When I was satisfied that the tunnel was empty, I let my eyes fall to my feet, where I examined the shoe. There wasn't a single scuff mark, not even the laces were untied. I touched it, and for a brief moment, I forced myself into the object's past, seeing what emotions still lingered near its history. Nothing about this process is reliable, but it was my best hope, and that's when the strangest image came to me. The last time the little girl was awake, she was on the beach. She was running with her father, giggling. He told her he had a secret and swept her up in his arms. She felt happy in that moment. Safe. She hadn't seen that man in a long time. He promised her a vacation, but she wasn't to tell her mother. The funniest thought suddenly came to my mind, and I looked up at the tunnel. The sickly, chalky lime covering the walls was disgustingly discolored, a grotesque rainbow of bone white and sickly purple. It stank as bad as it looked. And that voice, the one in the shadows, how terribly silent it had been. Hadn't I challenged it by raising my light? To something whose thoughts reeked of millennia of hatred, it had fled from the light, as if it had never had any power to begin with. I took a step back and dropped the shoe. Could it read my mind? Could it sense the recognition that had dawned within me, freezing my entire body in place as if a bucket of ice water had just been poured over my head? I think luck once again played a big part in my escape. If I had taken just one more step, I would have been caught. The tunnel closed, just inches from my feet. For a fleeting moment, I saw only a wall of muscle, and when it reopened, there was a hungry, twitching, circular maw as large as a manhole cover. Its muscular rim was covered in 100 beady eyes, dappled and staring at me with anger. It had been expecting something so delicious, so real. Instead, all it got was a mouthful of dust. I was so scared I scrambled backward on all fours. For a brief moment, the light was loose in my hand, and I lost sight of the drooling maw chasing me, only to turn back in an instant and find that it had vanished. The only sign that anything had ever been there was the sand trickling down from the ceiling of a human-made square corridor. I could have easily stayed there, frozen, arguing with myself whether it had ever truly happened. Except the shoe was still in one hand, and it had been coated in a foul-smelling slime when the mouth slammed shut. Even as I held it, the viscous, milky fluid began to burn, and I threw the shoe down with a cry of disgust. "Lucky boy," the voice said. "Lucky once in your house standing by the stairs, lucky twice in the woods saved by a friend. Now lucky 3 times in the darkness. How lucky can you be?" it asked. "If you keep poking around in places where you don't belong, your luck will run out." "No, you won't," I yelled. Whatever it was, it had made its point clear. It had set a very clever trap. The little girl wasn't on the beach. She was with her father somewhere in Ireland. I had sensed its intention buried deep within the lingering memories around the shoe like passive cigarette smoke. The shoe had been taken by something else, used as bait for me, and I wasn't safe yet. I had crawled right into the monster's belly like a grotesque idiot. I rushed up the stairs, trying to ignore the surging waves of emotion that were flooding the deck. It felt like I was escaping a flash flood of sewage. I could feel the thing, wherever it was, working its muscles just out of sight. What was it preparing for? What did it want? My light fell on the entrance, and all the breath left my body as if I had just been punched in the gut. For a brief moment, a tiny fraction of time too small to quantify, the tunnel I had dug in the sand was no longer there. Instead, there was a mouth, just like the one below, attached to a wall of muscle extending infinitely out of sight. But then the torch caught my eye, and the light revealed a mere pile of sand with a small crawl space between it and the ceiling. There were no calcified spikes threatening to impale me. No pulsating, glistening, digestive esophageal muscles waiting to swallow me. I suddenly realized I had been an idiot and I had left my shovel on the other side of the sand. There would be no digging. I had to crawl back the way I came. "Just try it," the darkness said, sensing my thoughts. I could feel it surrounding me like a spiritual pressure. I'm not sure I would describe this thing as angry, but more cold and lonely. It was everywhere and nowhere. Something inhuman, never human. It lived in the darkness and only in the darkness. Only my light kept me safe. Wherever it wandered, I saw dusty concrete and nothing more. But wherever the darkness loomed large, I could feel those ominous thoughts. The taste of dry cobwebs seeped back in like water through my fingers. I prepared to leave, keeping my light fixed straight ahead as I felt a blast of hot air blow over my shoulder. By this point, the line between thought and real sensation was blurring. The things it suggested to me began to feel as real as the ground beneath my feet. I didn't know if I would face a spiritual death or a physical one, but that thing was hunting me. Before I let my nerves get the better of me, I dashed forward and began to scramble and wriggle. The torch was effective in such a small space, illuminating it as clear as day. But behind me was a different story. I could feel warm limbs caressing my legs, could feel the dampness soaking through my pants where it pressed wetly against my bare skin. There was a hint of suction, perhaps as if something was preparing to clean me out entirely, like I was a chicken leg at a family barbecue. My head popped out of the tunnel just as something grabbed my leg. I lost all reason, and in a frenzy, I tried to kick and scream my way out. It was so stupid, with so little sand standing between me and freedom. My arms were pinned to my sides. Was the tunnel that narrow when I entered? I wondered. But there, freedom was so close, and all I had to do was loosen a little earth. But panic only made everything worse. I hurt my shoulder as I struggled, the pain intense, and tears streamed down my face. Frustration began to overwhelm me. I had tried everything to calm down, but it wasn't enough. Something had me firmly in its jaws. My leg wasn't just stuck. It was being pulled, slowly, irresistibly, back into a waiting gullet. "Luck's run out," the darkness said. I screamed so loudly I coughed up blood for days afterward. It was brutal. In that moment, I felt all hope extinguish, all joy vanish. This thing's mind was flooding into mine, undressing and rummaging through my memories like a rude guest. It showed me what it had in store for me. It showed me that I wouldn't even be alone. There were others, so many others, trapped in the darkness below. At least I finally found out why I had never met anyone else like me. We make ourselves clear to the predators lurking behind every shadow. This thing had been stalking me for a very, very long time. Someone out there heard my screams, though they never explained how. They said it just came to them, clear as day, and I think they might have been just sensitive enough to thoughts like me to find me. Anyway, someone came to my rescue. A cold and clammy but incredibly welcome hand in that moment grabbed my wrist and yanked me out. I didn't even care that it was my injured shoulder they pulled. By the time I wriggled out of that place, I was sobbing hysterically. The darkness had truly messed with my head. I don't remember much else. They took me to safety, and I was mentioned in the papers for going too far. The story was that I got stuck while crawling through and panicked. That's all, a severe panic attack. Whoever rescued me didn't stay. I tried to find them, tried to ask for help. I guess that thing sets traps for people like me, and it caught more than one. As I said, there's no way someone could have heard my actual screams through that door and with all that wind. Perhaps it's more that they heard my psychic screams. Perhaps they got a little too close to the darkness. Perhaps they caught a glimpse of what had me in its jaws. Who knows? I stay away from places like that now. Places with that particular asterisk feeling asterisk, you know? People who see me think I'm overreacting. They think I'm a coward or superstitious just because I won't go down into a basement or walk alone to an outhouse. I want to tell them the truth, perhaps even show them. But I can't do that. Seeing this thing, recognizing it, I think that's what made it angry. Anyone else could have gone into that place and been fine. It revealed itself to me because I had discovered it years ago. And who knows, maybe it's not the only thing like it. As I said, we all have those gut feelings, don't we? Everyone, no matter where or when they lived, has had those kinds of feelings. There are always places that will give us the creeps. We should trust those feelings more often.